All right, thank you for everyone for being here tonight. Good evening. I want to welcome you to West Shore Community College's Humankind series. Humankind is West Shore's arts and culture lecture series. It includes obviously lectures, but we also have art exhibitions, film series, performing arts events, and much more. I'm Dr. Matt Sanderson, and I'll be your host for this evening. I teach philosophy at the college, and I also oversee the planning for the Humankind series. I want to point out that I'm recording tonight's event. So if you ask a question at the end, your question may appear in the recording when I read it, for instance. But I still hope you'll ask questions, and don't worry, no one can see your video or your face. This is year 6 of West Shore Community College's Humankind series. This year we're focused on the theme, the future of work. We're specifically exploring the question, what is the future of work? We ask it as a question because we don't pretend to know the answer to that. In many ways, this is an age-old question, but it's especially become a bigger question as a result of COVID. For instance, nearly half of Americans still work from home during at least part of the work week. 95% of jobs that can be done from home are still being done remotely, at least part of the time. So many people are wondering how much longer remote work will last or in what form it will continue. We've also experienced what's been called the Great Resignation or the Great Upgrade, and people are curious about the long-term consequences of that. People are now also talking about quiet quitting and quiet firing. Companies are experimenting with 4-day work weeks, and short work seems to be changing rapidly. And the Humankind series is focused this year on exploring what its future might be. Tonight, we are so honored and grateful to have Professor Benjamin Hunnicutt with us. I first became aware of Professor Hunnicutt because as I was reading articles about the future of work to prepare for this series, it seemed like every article quoted him or referenced his work in some way. Professor Hunnicutt is a perfect speaker for this year's Humankind theme on the future of work because he's devoted his long academic career to better understanding work. In particular, much of his research focuses on exploring this paradox about work. Why do we still work so much when the goal of human progress has always been to work less, to have more time for leisure and recreation? Professor Hunnicutt has explored this question in a number of books about work. He has also written about work for major publications like the Wall Street Journal and Politico. He has appeared on numerous TV and radio broadcasts to talk about work, including programs like the Today Show and the Charlie Rose program. He has even served as a consultant for businesses and unions interested in shortening the work week and achieving better work-life balance. We are very, very excited he is here with us tonight and very much look forward to his presentation. There will be time for questions at the end of his presentation, so please be thinking of questions you'd like to ask our esteemed presenter. All right, without further ado, Professor Hunnicutt, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for inviting me. Welcome to all the Michiganders who are part of the audience here. I feel privileged to talk to you all from just across the lake from the University of Iowa City. This is something that I've been playing with working on for a long time, as Matt indicated before. What I've through the years called the great leisure mystery. It could be the great working mystery. I prefer this because I've been using it for so long. I ran across this mystery, this question, when I was a graduate student at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, taking a seminar with Professor George Mowry. I'm not sure anybody knows George Mowry, but for me, he was an outstanding scholar, and he still is in my estimation. He wrote about Theodore Roosevelt in the 1920s, a wonderful man. In any case, I came across this curiosity when I was in graduate school, and it has occupied me ever since. I tell my students in my classes, this is what sort of a foundational idea for research. Find a question that you genuinely would like to know the answer to, something that's a curiosity. And it's a good way to begin your research, and for me to continue my research. Now going on 50 years that I've been exploring this great leisure mystery. It's based on this curiosity. This is the century of shorter hours. During this century, from early 1900s, early 19th century, early 20th century, working hours were gradually but steadily shortened. You see there through until the 1900. Then there was a rapid decrease, something like a 16% decrease in working hours over that period of time. You can think of this also as a stair step for the 10-hour day in the middle of the graph. Then the 8-hour day comes in, and at the very last, the 5-day week made its appearance with Henry Ford. Working hours were cut virtually in half over the century of shorter hours. No one, the projections, John Maynard Keynes, observing this process, this century of shorter hours, predicted that by 1980, we'd be working about 2 or 3 hours a day. This is not unusual. The prediction that working hours would gradually get shorter and shorter dates back, as I will talk about later on in this lecture, to the 18th century. People like Jonathan Edwards, Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin said that a 6-hour day is entirely reasonable during his period of time, during the national period, 1800 to 1810. Entirely reasonable. Throughout the 19th century, you had these predictions that working hours would gradually get shorter and shorter. Again, John Maynard Keynes, the most famous economist of the 20th century, arguably, 2.5, 3 hours a day. Those who predicted that the process would end, nobody. I've done this a long time, and I've yet to find anyone who said that we would stop. The working week would stabilize at 40 hours. Quite the contrary, again, predictions were right that it would continue. But it didn't. This is the question that I came across when I was a graduate student. I read an article by one of your fellow Michiganders, John Owen, the University in Detroit. He wrote an article in the monthly labor review that I read when I was in graduate school. And he pointed out in the monthly labor review that we have had no increase in leisure, no decrease in working hours since the end of the Second World War. I know of very few people that have had their lives changed because of an article in the monthly labor review, but it happened to me. Why? What the heck happened? In fact, if you look carefully at the graph, I'm not sure you can see my cursor. Working hours have increased since the mid-1970s, and they continue an upward journey. Recently, as Matt was pointing out, there's been some movement in the opposite direction. That is very interesting to me, and I'll be talking about that later on. But until COVID, this upward trajectory had, it not only had this process stopped, but until the 2020s, it had reversed direction. Another curiosity is that during this period of time of stabilization, the workforce increased as a percentage of the total population. You might guess why. Women are entering the workforce. So more people are working, but we're working longer. So the fraction represented by total people working, the total amount of time that we have of everybody's time, that percentage has grown significantly since the Great Depression. My question again is why? What happened? Why? Not only why, but among the questions that I've tried to ask is why is it that during this period of time, when we were relatively poor, I mean, compared to what our income, people living in the late 19th, early 20th century were dirt poor. Yet they were able to afford to decrease their working hours by half. Now, in a country and a people that have become the richest in history, we're not able to afford additional free time. And in fact, we're selling off some of the time that we have until recently, again, some movement has occurred. So a series of questions. What happened? Why is it that labor unions that were founded on the demand for short hours, why have they given the cause, virtually given the cause of a series of questions associated with this great leisure mystery, the biggest of which is the plot thickens as I'm continuing my mystery metaphor. Even stranger, the way in which we think about work, the importance we assign to work. This is a quote from Henry David Thoreau, one of my favorites, as you might imagine, 1837, sorry. His commencement essay at Harvard. The order of things should be somewhat reversed. The seventh should be man's day of toil, wherein to earn his living by the sweat of his brow, and the other six his Sabbath of the affections of the soul, in which to range this widespread garden and drink in the soft influences and sublime revelations of nature. A weird dude, right? Henry David Thoreau? No, he was not a weird dude. Daniel Rogers, for me, one of the historians that have influenced my work more than any others. His book is The Work Ethic in Industrial America. He observed that this quote, he's making reference here to this quote, Thoreau spoke as a conservative and a traditionalist. For the first American dream, before the others shoved it rudely aside, had been one not of work, but of leisure. James Thurlow Adams, The Epic of America, another book that's influential in my life, coined the phrase, the American dream. And when he talked about it, he coined that phrase. He was talking about this. He was not talking about wealth in terms of material wealth, but the intangibles of life. That was the original American dream. And in its coinage, what the word originally meant, I submit to you, has changed. This is some other indications of how widespread that vision was about the importance of work vis-a-vis not working, time off. This is a letter from John Adams to his wife Abigail during the Revolutionary War. You probably know this quote, one of my favorites. I must study politics in war, that our sons may have the liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. Our sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, so forth and so on, commerce, in order to give their children the right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, porcelain. You see that progress, American progress. Forgot the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson. The pursuit of happiness. When Thomas Jefferson wrote The Pursuit of Happiness, he had in mind this larger freedom, this freedom beyond commerce, beyond the economy, to realize the best that we could be as human beings, the pursuit of happiness into those free realms of the soul and the mind. My third book, Free Time, The Forgotten American Dream, is a catalog of hopes and expectations of a variety of people. It's not pie in the sky, because if you remember, there was a firm foundation being laid for this dream in the gradual drawing down of human labor. It was realistic because the machine technology will free us, providing us with the time necessary to realize the best that we could be freely outside of the marketplace. A chorus of voices, as I said, but I try to catalog all those folks that wrote about this forgotten dream, a variety, a widespread vision. I give you a taste or two of the folks that did expect this to come. My favorite example is Walt Whitman. He writes about higher progress. He writes about it in this fashion. There are two grand stages of preparation in human progress. I perceive that now a third, three stages, without which the other two are useless. The first stage is politics, foundational rights, political freedom, indeed of all people. This is democratic vistas. The second stage is the economy. We're free in the economy to make our way, using our machines to produce more and more so that we can get enough, so that we can turn our attention to the higher, the final, the crowning glory. Crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. That's not bad. In three stages, the world evidently supposes, and we have evidently supposed so too. Beautiful words. I love to read them. That the states are merely to achieve the equal franchise and elective government, to inaugurate this respectability of labor, and become a nation of practical operatives, law-abiding, orderly, and well-off. Yes, those are indeed parts of the task of America, but they are not only do not exhaust the progressive conception, but rather arise teeming with it as the mediums of a deeper, higher progress, daughter of a physical revolution, mother of the true revolutions, which are the interior life and the arts. For so long as the spirit is not changed, any change of appearance is of no avail. Higher progress, progress beyond political freedom, progress beyond economic freedom into this higher realm, this higher progress. And it's not just an influential, important folks like Walt Whitman who are articulate and write books, but ordinary folks, working class people. This is a quote from one of the mill girls in Lowell, Massachusetts, who are struggling for the 10-hour day. She has the vision too, and she writes about it. She writes about it in a letter to the editor of the Voice of Industry that I was lucky enough to find, plowing through all the archives, reading these newspapers one after the other. No indexes there. Anyway, that vision, I can find it in these newspapers of women and a few men who fighting for the 10-hour day have this vision of getting enough material goods through the economy and then moving on to this higher progress. So the forgotten American dream is here. Some of the names of the variety of people that I write about. And then I put out. We got time. Got a little time. I'll add a couple to this list. Some of my favorites. One of whom is Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous architect. this vision of the forgotten American dream, of the American dream, a time to live, was at the center of his writing. It surprised me. It really shocked me to come across this and to read systematically those things that Frank Lloyd Wright wrote about his architecture. His idea, his vision was that his buildings were a metaphor of this free time that was coming into the American experience. The free spaces that characterize Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture, he deliberately put them there as a metaphor for this freedom that he thought would be avail the common man and woman to the finer things in life, to express themselves, to be creative. Of course, he was very interested in people building their own homes. Some of his Usonian architecture some of the plans that I share with my students, he thought people would have the time to actually express themselves artistically in architecture by building their own nest. He thought it was a primitive need that we all have. The other person I'll share with you really quickly, and also Dorothy Canfield Fisher, as well as the president of the University of Chicago, Robert Hutchins, the famous president, University of Chicago. He tried to convert the University of Chicago into the preparation for leisure. He thought that higher education was all about preparing people for this new time that was bound to come. It was inevitable. So we might postpone it a while, but it was inevitable. And the university needed to take a lead, educating people for the use of that time, building those skills that are necessary. Dorothy Canfield Fisher also, she was the head of the Adult Education Association for years and years. She thought education, learning, sharing our experience of learning with each other, opening up forum like this forum would be the sort of the apex of the democratic experience. Leisure, the place to realize the best that we can do. Humane and moral freedoms often spoken about, and that we have the time, the freedom from work, from necessity, to move into this higher progress. Work and wealth remain a means to that final end. Indeed, the hope for the West for over 2,000 years. From the Greek Golden Age, leisure was the basis of culture. It provided the glue for civilization, holding us together, the opportunity for the practice of the liberal arts. Why do you think they're called the liberal arts? It's not because a lot of us pinko commie types, liberals, teach it, but it's the free arts, the arts of freedom, not the arts of work. The liberal arts are the arts of freedom. The servile arts are the arts of work. It's also this leisure is the place for the expression and perfection of virtue. It's not just the liberal arts that are practiced for the fun of it, but in leisure, practicing the liberal arts, we develop the skills of living together as human beings. Virtue. Eudaimonia is the Greek word that Aristotle used. We translate often as happiness. The best translation, best word we have is flourish. It is habitual virtue. It is living out a life that is virtuous, automatic, habitual. That is higher progress. That is the end for which the university culture itself are the means. Leisure, the basis of culture. This is some of the things that's surprising for generations of students. I ask for if anyone can trace the etymology of the word school or scholarship, know where it comes from. It comes from the Greek word for leisure, surprisingly schole, the place for the school's original purpose, the higher education. I mean, you have vocational education, but higher education had to do with leisure, with learning how to be free beyond necessity, learning those things that are important, that are ends in themselves, the most important of which is, of course, the virtues, tolerance, veracity, mutuality, a long list of virtues. These are the skills of living together, without which our humanity is yet to be fully formed. With these skills, we can live our lives with other people in a fulfilling way. The coming of the work ethic changes a little bit. There was with the Protestant Reformation, there's a new view of work. Before the Protestant Reformation, work was seen to be not only a means to an end, but generally associated with slaves or with people who are servile, folks who are lower class and so forth. The original words for work that are the origin of the modern words. At this time, I ask my classes, what is the Spanish word for work? You guys in the audience think of the Spanish word for work, the French word for work, trabajo, travail. The origin of those words from Latin is tripilium, which is a instrument of torture, very like a Christian cross, except it's a three-pronged cross, a cross X piece with an upright in the middle of it, and the people are essentially crucified. Painful, right? Something, labor also. Labore has to do with childbirth in Latin. That's something for excruciating. In fact, my favorite is job. It's Anglo-Saxon, Celtic too. There's some controversy over that job, but it has to do. Its original meaning had to do with human excrement. And my mother and I had a private language, and that's what that word meant, both as a verb and as an. Something has changed. Work is seen to be very negative in its. If you look at the etymology of the thing, until the coming of the Protestant work ethic, at which time work is given a religious charge. The book that we all know and love, of course, is Max Weber's book, The Protestant Ethic in the Spirit of Capitalism. He's asking the question, as I'm asking the question, get a question, and pursue that question. His question was, why did capitalism begin when it did? Why did it begin and take off when it did? And his answer is changes in ideas about work. Before, work was not very looked down upon, and now there's a religious impetus behind, just at the right time, to give a push to capitalism, and capitalism springboards off of that new assessment of work as very positive. The Protestant ethic. Work was virtuous, becomes virtuous. It has a larger religious calling, a part of God's calling to human beings. The word vocation, as you might know, comes from the Latin vocatur, which means to be called God is calling us to human. But work remains with the context. Even as the beginning of the Protestant work ethic springboards capitalism into this rapid period of growth, still work has this context. It remains a means to an end. It disciplines humans, but it also prepares for something greater. It was not an end in itself, but rather it remained a means to an end, a means to gain wealth, and then move on from that wealth to better things. Prepare God's kingdom is one of the things. Exhibit 2 here, Jonathan Edwards. I don't know if you remember the Great Awakening during the 1730s. He was the most influential philosopher Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy says that Jonathan Edwards is the most influential philosopher in America, in American history. He's influenced in more of American thought than anyone else. Here's a quote. "'Tis probable that the world shall be more like heaven in the millennium." He's looking forward to when the machines, when we use our reason. He's a child of the Enlightenment, is Jonathan Edwards. That contemplation and spiritual employments and those things that more directly concern the mind and religion and the soul will be more the saints' ordinary business than now. There will be so many contrivances and inventions to facilitate and expedite their necessary secular business that they will have more time. His disciple talked about 4 hours a day, maybe 6. So again, he has a vision back in this period of time. Linking it again, he's a great exponent, proponent of the Protestant work ethic, but still in context. This is the context, a larger purpose. So my solution, so why? I wish we had time to talk, or we have an opportunity to talk about this together. It always, the question always results in some interesting discussion. My answers that I've come up with all these years of consumerism. Number one, we've turned our attention to luxuries and not leisure. I wrote my dissertation with these two answers prominent. 90-some% of the things that we buy now, we did not buy in my lifetime. And we depend on that growth of luxuries, things that we've never seen before. Those things will become an everyday necessity in order for the economy to continue to grow. Government interventions to make the market create, work, and sustain economic growth forever. This is the politics of the Great Depression, political policy that we live with now. The federal government's main intervention into the marketplace since the Great Depression, during the Great Depression and since, has been to sustain full-time, full employment, stimulating the economy by deficit spending, government programs, government public works, in order to maintain the demand in the economy necessary to support full-time jobs. Full-time was set during Roosevelt's administration, quite deliberately by Roosevelt and those around him, at 40 hours. Before, there's a sliding scale, full-time work. After, full-time work becomes 40 hours or more. This is no decree from Mount Sinai, from the divinity, that we have to work 40 hours a week. It is a historical accident that is associated with the politics of the Great Depression. The last, and I think the most critical, and that I'll concentrate on from now on, is a cultural change, a change in belief, values, and aspiration. Today, there's no destination beyond more work and more wealth. There's no getting enough. Scarcity is perpetual. We'll never get to the point of abundance. We will always have to work full time. That's something that I heard when I interviewed your fellow Michiganders over in Battle Creek and the neighboring city of, I'm blanking on that name. It'll come to me in a second. Change in values. 20th century ideas about work and leisure are new, brand new. Work becomes an end in itself. Work is for more work, forever and ever, in eternity. Wealth is for more wealth. We'll never get enough. Perpetual scarcity is what the economy is about. Work becomes the chief virtue and social glue, replacing, or purportedly to replace, the other virtues that Aristotle thought were necessary to support us. The Protestant work ethic entirely secularized, right? All of the God talk has been eliminated from the work ethic becomes the spirit of capitalism. Leisure, no longer the place to realize the best of our humanity. Leisure is at best a silly thing. It's not the place for virtue. Indeed, as I've argued in several places, including the Huffington Post here, you might look at this article, Work Emerges as a Modern Religion or Faith. This article here in Huffington Post, work is our religion and it's failing us. I'll argue in this article that Paul Tillich's, I hope some of you recognize his name. He is another of my favorite writers in the 20th century. His existential questions, who am I? What do I owe the people around me? What is my and humanity's destiny? We answer increasingly in terms of work. His point, Tillich's point, we all have a religion, if you understand religion in terms of our answers to these existential questions we all have. The results of work without end and this new religion of work are two new projects. The eternal creation of new work needed to assure full-time, full employment, 40 hours a week at least. The provision of good jobs for most people, jobs that will meet our expectation of fulfilling, rewarding occupations that provide meaning as well as a living. Those are tall orders, I'm here to tell you. Is it possible? It's a failing faith, I'm arguing, that this new religion, with these two projects, with these two necessities facing to support this new religion, it's a failure. It's failing, as Matt probably has talked to you about, because of automation. This eternal growth is not sustainable. Earth resources is not simply, we don't have enough. How many Earths would it take for for everyone on the planet to live as Americans? 1, 2, 3, 5 Earths. Unlimited growth in a finite environment that is the world, the Earth, is a non-starter. The other, automation. This is an Atlantic monthly article that Matt may have talked to you about. They're talking about the coming of self-driving machines, of all the jobs that are repetitive, retail jobs, for example, and so forth, that are going to be taken sooner or later by computer algorithms. It's only a matter of time. We're seeing automation take more and more jobs, making it less and less credible that new work can be found. More important, the myth of good jobs for all is increasingly unrealistic. Where are these good jobs? Where are the good jobs? The Harris poll reports recently that 70% of employees in the United States are not involved in, enthusiastic about, or committed to their work. Recent Gallup poll found that 87% of employees are not engaged at their job. In fact, the ratio of people who are engaged to the job and are actively disengaged, who hate the job and are rebelling against it, it's changing. So more and more people are actively disengaged. But the one that I'm interested in here now is the people who are not engaged. A failing faith. Indeed, instead of bringing us together as the Protestant ethic was designed to do, work tends to divide those of us with good jobs versus those with people with Joe jobs. It does not bring us together. Those versus those with no jobs, the unemployed, the dropouts, the retired people. This work faith is not something that's commonly held by some of the people that are on the outs, who are dispossessed by the economy. A failing faith, Durkheim versus Aristotle. Work fails to be the social glue holding us together. This is Emil Durkheim's claim that in the modern age, work can provide, bring us together be the medium in which we can live our lives peacefully and agreeably together. The farmer brings his or her produce to the market. The tailor, the shoemaker bring their contributions to the market. We develop these interdependencies. We depend on the farmer, and the farmer depends on us, and so on and so on. These webs of interdependency, all of us seeking our own goods, the selfish system, but yet with these interdependencies are held together amicably, at least, at best, perhaps. Yet, the devotion to work fails to be the cardinal virtue that a glue to replace other virtues. I think that's in question now, whether this new work ethic, spirit of capitalism, work for its own self, can be that glue that holds. Of course, Aristotle and down through the ages, his claim, in fact, Plato actively dismisses this social work as the glue argument, and the rival claim, what holds a culture together, is the people glue. Makes more and more sense. The virtues, the skills that we can learn and pass from generation to generation are absolutely essential to hold us together. Following Alistair McIntyre here, perhaps Matt can talk to you about Alistair McIntyre, a book, again, that's very influential in my life, After Virtue, 1981. He sort of begins this new discussion among philosophers called virtue ethics. My thesis, and following after Alistair McIntyre, just as the ethics of the Enlightenment are failing us as moral discourse today, without the virtue, this is McIntyre's point, discourse and culture disintegrate. The modern work ethic, work as the cardinal virtue and an end in itself, is failing as a substitute for the other virtues, with the same result that McIntyre says happens after virtue, the loss of ethical agreement, loss of social cohesion and agreement, confusion and lack of direction and purpose, lack of a telos, an end, a context for ethics. I'm running out of time. What is there to do for me? And I'll try to end this up in 5 minutes. Represent the American dream, publish my books, give my talks such as this one, teach my classes, and somehow represent that forgotten American dream as a humane and moral alternative to the world of total work. An alternative that's not only realistic, but essential and inspirational, hoping to inspire, perhaps a bit exotic of me, but as my old mama would say, it's better to light one candle than to curse the darkness. They're hopeful signs that Matt talked to you about. One of the ones that I like to talk about in my classes is the coming of post-materialism, the new generation. The millennials, generation X and Z, are more and more interested in experiences, buying experiences, and less interested in consumerism and owning stuff. Also the short hour experiments that we're seeing around the world, the 4-day week and the 6-hour day. What to me, though, is that is hopeful and that excites me now, I'd have only a few minutes to introduce the idea, is the evolution of the economy. Pine and Gilmore, my friends up in Minneapolis, the University of Minnesota, have written a book called Welcome to the Experience Economy. They suggest the economy has these stages of evolution from commodities. Commodities give way to goods, manufacturing, give way to services, progression of economic values, to experiences. And more people, more and more of the economy now is based on the buying and selling of the experiences, and then transformation, where the customer becomes the product. The customer is transformed in some of the ways that are possible. Here's a definition: the experience economy, customer adds value. A transformation economy, the customer is the product. It opens for me the possibility of packaging and marketing the virtues, harnessing the profit motive in service to the propagation of the virtues. That sounds like a tall order. And I need a book to talk about it. My recent book, go out and buy at least 2 copies of this book by audience. I explore this idea, the age of experiences, harnessing happiness to build a new economy. My reasoning is that with the coming of the age of experience, the demand for leisure will naturally increase in the workplace, and without government regulation, but through the free market. Liberation capitalism, I call it, following John Maynard Keynes and his ideas. The demand for time will increase. I'll end now. I hope I've got a couple of minutes with an example that might put some meat on my quick and abstract description of the experience and transformation economy and selling the virtue. The Harlem experience. Airbnb has as one of its lines of the things it sells experiences, and they list experiences that you could go and buy based on where you are. My son lives in the Upper West Side in New York City, and my grandson. So we arranged to visit this young man up in Harlem, a few blocks from where Benjamin lives, my son. And he sells this experience, this intercultural experience. He show people around the neighborhood, introducing you to some of his friends, taking you to his kitchen, teaching you street dance. My wife and I love to dance. I had to sign, the pandemic struck. Thriving business he had. For 2 of us, with his experience, he was delivering some of those virtues that positive psychology and Aristotle have proven are vital to our well-being, such as respect, tolerance, perspective, walking in the other guy's shoes. It's hard to hate someone that you've spent the evening dancing with. Here's another, and I'll end with this. This is something that next time I go visit my son and grandson, the Black experience in Harlem, $40 for 3 hours. This pastor there at a church in Harlem will tell you about the culture, about his church. He introduce you to the congregation, allow you to sing with his congregation. I guess you could go to show up in his church, but he'll take special pains to treat you in a special way. So ends the lecture, and I'll stop now and ask if there are any questions that I could.
Thank you, Professor Hunnicutt.
Sure.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. To our audience tonight, please feel free to ask questions. You can put those in the Q&A box you see at the bottom of your screen. And Professor Hunnicutt will answer your questions. Please feel free to ask questions.
Matt, while we're waiting, do you have a question for me?
Yeah, I am curious. The idea of going back to virtue in Aristotle's sense.
Yeah.
So I wonder, some people argue that we don't go back in history once we move on. So do you think it is possible to go back? I mean, is that even what you're saying?
I don't see it going back at all.
Okay.
What the positive psychologist Martin Seligman at Penn State and others, Csikszentmihalyi, just died. What they're writing about, and the recent research has been brand new research in positive psychology and positive neurobiology has validated the Aristotelian virtues. They have a book called Handbook of Character Strengths and Virtues. They see that the virtues as as necessary for flourishing, for human beings to flourish, and they are the traditionals. They are not just Aristotle's virtues, but the virtues that have come down to us from the East and West. They make a long list of virtues, but their argument is not going back at all. For me, it's the cutting edge of modern empirical science, to those things that allow us to build skills to live with each other, are those very things that make it possible for us to be happy or to flourish, eudaimonia. So for me, it's not going back, but it's right at the cutting edge of what some of the best science that's out there is discovering.
I see. Thank you. And then I see we have a comment in the chat that the library at the college will have at least 2 copies of your new book.
Thank you. The book came out in 2020, and just as COVID began, and so it's still sputtering and trying to find its legs. It's sort of a change for me, but anyway, I do my best to publicize.
So do you find the quiet quitting movement encouraging?
I'm sorry?
Do you find quiet quitting encouraging?
I still didn't hear you, Matt.
Quiet quitting?
Quiet quitting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that encouraging?
I don't know yet what to make of it. I think something is out there. I think it's an expression of maybe the post-materialism, the change of values, that sort of underlies the whole business of the Great Resignation and that sort of thing. Yet to let's watch what's happening. The experience of COVID, working at home, I think has indicated to a lot of people by that direct experience that there might indeed be a life beyond work. There might be something to do when you're at home, living your life outside of work, that can be as rewarding and fascinating as being on the job. So maybe that experience of leisure that people having for the first time, many of them, is an inducement to, well, maybe I could integrate more of this time into my life and find ways to do that. That's responsible and realistic. I'm not talking, I've never talked about people acting irresponsibly and spending beyond their means, for example, or anything like that. The choice to sell our work time, sell the time of our lives, we should take that as seriously as we do what we buy. I tell my classes, you'll have only one thing to sell, most of us, and that's time. And that's perhaps the most vital, most important economic decision that you'll make. And that when you buy whatever you buy, you need to consider not just the cost in terms of money, but the cost in terms of time. Your money or your life is a critical decision or that we need to take responsibility for, and not just assume that we don't have that choice, because we do.
Thank you.
Yep.
Please put your questions in the Q&A box. Professor Hunnicutt is taking your questions now. Thank you.
Well,
While we're waiting, I'll ask another question. Do you think religion might be associated with leisure again?
I'm sorry?
Do you think religion might be associated with leisure again?
That's a good question. There are some theologians, Moltmann, for example, the theology of play, that that's the only one I can. Well, actually, Gods and Games. There once was several theologians who were interested in play and leisure, but that was during the 1960s and 70s. Subsequent to that, I haven't seen that much. I'd like to think there would be a renewal of interest in short hour. There was among Jews also the fight for the first articles I ever wrote about this topic was about the Jewish Sabbath movement in the 1920s. As you know, blue laws and so forth prohibited Jews from celebrating, from working on Saturday. I'm sorry, working on Sunday so that they would have Saturday off. And so they were very interested in the 5-day work week, as you might imagine, for having Saturdays off. And they wrote some splendid stuff. Bernard Druckmann, about Silver, talking about the Sabbath as a model, a historical model for the new free time that was coming into the Western civilization, that we needed a guidance, we needed a context for this new time. And for these folks, the Sabbath represented the best of what humanity is capable of. Time for tradition, for family, for community, for charity, those sorts of things. So that vision was alive and well amongst some of the Jewish communities. And there are a couple of questions, Matt, in what got you into discussion about the humankind fall. Well, as I said, I was taking a class with Chapel Hill, and George Mowry assigned us several topics. One of them was leisure in the 1920s, and I chose that more or less at random and came across this great leisure mystery that why did working hours after 100 years of being cut virtually in half, why did that process stop? And I pursued answers to that question. Do you think people wanting 4-day weeks will continue to move forward? That's a good question. I'm not sure. Let's wait and see. I think there is some movement out there, and I attribute it again to the coming of post-materialism, a change in values from the tangible goods to the intangibles of life, a movement toward, I think, possibility of virtue. Are there any consequences that occur from leisure? Yeah, I think it's a tricky business. So did Robert Hutchins. Robert Hutchins thought that colleges ought to take responsibility in preparing people for the worthy use of leisure time. Dorothy Canfield Fisher, part of the progressive, the adult education movement, part of the cardinal principles of education from the National Education Association, 1917, was education for the worthy use of leisure. So educators through the 20s and 30s were very interested in that problem of leisure, of preparing people with the skills necessary to make this leisure something rewarding, rather than a threat, a time of idleness is the devil's workshop, that sort of thing. We need the skills, the liberal arts, in order to fill that time, and we need the practice of virtue to make it possible to live in that time, to have those skills necessary to live with the people around us. I suggest that there's a technology of warning in the book that I mentioned before, The Age of Experience, a new eudaimonic technology. I don't know if any of you remember Future Shock, Toffler's book in the 1970s. He predicted that shortly we will have a technology to produce experiences. I think we're moving in that direction, using science, for psychology and neurobiology, using science to design new experiences, a technology that can do for the virtues, for our capacity to live with each other, to the intangible goods of life, what other scientific technologies have done for the tangible parts of life. My mama started her life, there are no automobiles, no airplanes, no phones to speak of. She ended her life with a miraculous advance due to technology, due to scientific application of science to human needs, human problems. I foresee the same thing happening now, as psychology and neurobiology applied to experience design can produce those revolution in the way we live our lives, not again tangible things, but those are intangible things, the enjoyment of our life, and the ability to live virtuously with those skills necessary to be a social animal.
All right, we're just about out of time.
Okay.
Professor Hunnicutt, I want to thank you so much for being with us and for
Certainly welcome.
thank you for deepening our understanding of work. I want to thank the audience for being here. We'd like to ask that you take our survey before you log off. Please take our survey. I'm going to share my screen, and that's going to allow you to hold your phone up to the screen and click on the QR code, and then take our survey from there. So please take a minute to do that. Just going to give everybody a minute to do that.
Matt, is it okay if I leave?
Yep. And then I'm just going to end the webinar now. Thank you again for being here, Professor
You're
Hunnicutt. When I end this, it should also send you to the survey. So please, anyone who's interested, please consider taking our survey. And thank you again to everyone for being here tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt.